My husband laughed and said, "You'd be nothing without me." I stayed quiet, raised our child, and let him control everything. Then I walked into court with proof he never expected. When the judge ruled, he stopped laughing and I finally found my power. I remember staring at him across our kitchen island, the marbles still warm from the afternoon sun. My coffee had gone cold. My hands didn't shake. I thought they would. Instead, they rested flat on the counter like they belonged to someone else. He smiled, shook his head, and went back to scrolling on his phone. As if he hadn't just erased me with one sentence. When I met Daniel, I was 24 and tired of struggling. I had just moved to the city with a suitcase, a degree that hadn't paid off yet, and a constant fear of checking my bank account. He was confident, established, older by 8 years, the kind of man who ordered for both of us at restaurants and somehow made it feel like a relief. "I like taking care of things," he told me on our third date. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. We married 2 years later, a small ceremony. His parents paid. He insisted it made more sense since he was better with money. At the time, it sounded practical, generous even. The first year was good, comfortable. I worked part-time while he climbed the corporate ladder. Every promotion came with a new reminder. "We're doing great because I work my ass off." I nodded. I cooked. I cleaned. I told myself partnership didn't have to be perfectly balanced to be fair. But slowly, the reminders turned into jokes. "Must be nice to nap whenever you want." "I wish I had your easy life." He'd laugh, I'd force a smile. He doesn't mean it like that, I told myself, over and over. Then came the rules. He suggested I quit my job after we had our son, Ethan. "Childcare costs more than you make anyway," he said, sliding a spreadsheet across the table like it was evidence. I agreed. I loved being with my baby. I told myself this was temporary. Temporary turned into 5 years. I asked about taking online courses. He frowned. "Why? We don't need the money." I mentioned freelancing. "Sounds risky." Every idea was met with concern that felt a lot like control. But it was subtle, wrapped in logic, delivered with a kiss on my forehead. "You don't need to stress," he'd say. "I've got us." Somewhere along the way, us started sounding like him. The night he said it, we were arguing about something small. A credit card charge I didn't recognize. A dress I'd bought for myself without asking. "You should have told me," he said. "I didn't think I needed permission to buy a dress," I replied. He scoffed. "That sound still makes my stomach twist." "Let's be real," he said. "You don't make money, I do. You'd be nothing without me." Then he laughed. Not cruelly, casually, like statting the weather. I waited for him to take it back, to realize what he'd said. He didn't. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the echo of his confidence and the sound of my own heartbeat. Nothing. That word followed me to bed, into my dreams, into the mirror the next morning. I started noticing things after that. The way my name wasn't on most accounts, how I had to ask for transfers instead of having access, how he referred to our house as his when talking to friends. "I bought this place before we married," he'd say. "Technically, it's mine." Technically. I started feeling small in ways I couldn't explain, like I was slowly disappearing while still standing in plain sight. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. We were at a dinner party with his colleagues. I was seated at the end of the table, half listening, half feeding Ethan mashed potatoes. Someone asked what I did. Before I could answer, Daniel jumped in. "She doesn't work," he said, grinning. "She's basically retired at 30. Laughter around the table, polite, awkward. I felt my face burn. "She holds the house together," someone tried to recover. Daniel raised his glass. "Sure, but let's not pretend she could survive without me." More laughter. That was it. Something cracked so cleanly inside me that I didn't even feel pain at first. Just clarity. I smiled, finished the night, put Ethan to bed. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't tell Daniel what I was doing. I moved quietly, carefully, like someone planning an escape without setting off alarms. I called an old friend who worked in legal admin. She gave me a name, a family law attorney known for being calm, thorough, and ruthless when needed. The first meeting was terrifying. I felt like an imposter sitting across from her desk, hands folded, explaining my life. "I don't have income," I said quickly. "Everything's in his name." She nodded, took notes. "And what do you do all day?" she asked. I laughed bitterly. "Raise our child, run the house, support his career." She looked up. "Then you're not nothing." That sentence almost broke me. We talked about assets, about documentation, about patterns of financial control. "You're not powerless," she said. "You've just been convinced you are." I went home and started collecting everything. Bank statements, emails, texts, screenshots of him refusing access, messages where he belittled me. At night, I lay next to him, listening to his breathing, wondering how someone could sleep so peacefully after shrinking another person for years. I started journaling again, writing down things he said, dates, times. Just in case, I told myself. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't preparing just in case. I was preparing because I was done. Daniel noticed the change before I was ready to reveal it. "You've been distant," he said one night. "I'm tired," I replied. He studied me. "You're not thinking of doing anything stupid, are you?" The word stupid hit me like a slap. I smiled softly. "No, why would I?" He relaxed, wrapped an arm around me like ownership. I stared at the wall and thought, "You have no idea." The papers were served on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't home when it happened. I was sitting in my attorney's office, holding a paper cup of water, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. My phone buzzed. "Daniel, what the hell is this?" I didn't respond. Minutes later, another message. "Daniel, you can't do this. You have nothing, no job, no savings." I read it slowly. Then I typed back one sentence. We'll let the court decide that." My hands shook for the first time. Not from fear. From relief. The first court date was set for 6 weeks later. 6 weeks of silence, broken only by logistics and thinly veiled threats. Daniel moved out temporarily, but not before reminding me that the house was his. He said it calmly, like he was doing me a favor by not changing the locks. "I'll be back when you cool off," he said. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Because in those 6 weeks, I became someone he didn't recognize anymore. I opened a checking account in my own name. It felt illegal. Like I was doing something wrong just by existing independently. The banker smiled, congratulated me, slid the debit card across the desk. I cried in my car afterward. This is what freedom looks like, I thought. Small, plastic, trembling in my hand. My attorney helped me file for temporary support. Daniel contested it immediately. "She's exaggerating," he told his lawyer. "I've always taken care of her." The irony almost made me laugh. He started calling late at night. "You're making a huge mistake," he said. "You're not cut out for this." "I'll fail," he warned. "And when I do, he'd take Ethan, he'd win." I stopped answering. Instead, I focused on building a record, parenting schedules, school pickups, doctor appointments, every invisible thing I'd done for years without credit. The judge would see it all. Daniel's tone shifted once he realized fear wasn't working. He tried charm next. "I miss our family," he said over coffee one afternoon, uninvited. "You know I didn't mean what I said." I watched him talk with the same confidence that used to melt me. "You laughed," I said quietly. He waved it off. "I joke when I'm uncomfortable." "That wasn't a joke," I replied. His smile thinned. "Don't turn this into something it's not." I stood up. "I already have." The day of the hearing, Daniel showed up in his best suit, the one I used to press for him before big meetings. He nodded at people, shook hands, smiled like a man with everything under control. I sat beside my attorney in a simple blouse, hands folded in my lap. Daniel didn't look at me until we were seated. When he did, his eyes flicked over me like an audit, calculating, dismissive. Still so sure. His lawyer went first. They painted me as unmotivated, dependent, someone who chose comfort over ambition. She hasn't worked in years, his lawyer said smoothly. My client supported her fully. I stared at the wooden table, breathing slowly. Then it was my turn. My attorney stood. She hasn't worked for pay, she said. She worked every day. She presented evidence, messages where Daniel denied access to funds, emails discouraging employment, the spreadsheet he'd used to convince me to quit my job. Then came the journals. Page after page of his words, his jokes, his threats. The courtroom went quiet. Daniel shifted beside his lawyer for the first time. When the judge asked me to speak, my legs felt weak as I stood. But my voice didn't. I believed my role didn't matter because I wasn't earning money, I said. I believed him when he told me I was nothing without him. Daniel looked up sharply. I met his eyes. But I raised our child. I ran our home. I gave up my career so he could build his. I didn't disappear, I was erased. The judge nodded slowly. Daniel's confidence cracked. Just a little. The ruling came an hour later. Temporary spousal support, child support, shared custody with primary residence granted to me, full financial disclosure ordered. Daniel stared straight ahead as the judge spoke. No laughter, no smirk. When it was over, he finally looked at me. You planned this, he said under his breath. I thought of the night in the kitchen, the laugh, the word nothing. I survived this, I replied. The months that followed were messy. Daniel dragged his feet, missed deadlines, tried to hide assets. But the court wasn't amused. Every delay cost him. Every lie chipped away at the image he'd built so carefully. And every step, I grew steadier. I took an online certification, started freelancing during Ethan's school hours. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first time I paid a bill with my own money, I sat on the floor and laughed. The final hearing took place almost a year after the first. Daniel looked older, tired, smaller. The judge divided assets, granted long-term spousal support, ordered reimbursement for years of financial imbalance. When it was over, Daniel didn't speak to me. He walked out without looking back. That night, I tucked Ethan into bed in a home that finally felt like mine. I stood alone in the kitchen, the same spot where Daniel had laughed months ago. The marble was cool this time. I smiled. He was wrong. I hadn't been nothing without him. I'd been everything despite him. Sometimes closure isn't peace. It's proof. The funny thing about winning in court is that it doesn't feel like a victory right away. It feels quiet. Too quiet. The adrenaline fades, the signatures dry, and suddenly there's no one to fight anymore. Just a stack of documents, a tired body, and a life you have to rebuild from the inside out. Daniel disappeared after the ruling. Not completely. He still showed up for custody exchanges, still sent clipped emails about schedules. But the man who once filled every room with his presence was gone. And in his place was a stranger who wouldn't meet my eyes. At first, I thought that would feel satisfying. It didn't. It felt sad. The first time he came to pick up Ethan after the divorce was finalized, he stood on the porch like a guest. He rang the bell instead of using his old key. I opened the door and saw hesitation flicker across his face. Not anger, not arrogance. Uncertainty. Ethan ran past me, backpack bouncing. Daddy. Daniel smiled instantly, crouched down, hugged him tight. I watched from the doorway, hands wrapped around the doorframe. For a second, I wondered if I'd imagined everything, if maybe I'd overreacted, if maybe. Then Daniel stood up, looked at me and said, "You've redecorated." Not the house. Not our house. Just redecorated. A small comment, neutral, but it told me everything. He no longer felt ownership. And neither did I. I felt peace. Life after him wasn't glamorous. It was spreadsheets and second-hand furniture and learning how to negotiate contracts that once would have terrified me. It was late nights after Ethan fell asleep, laptop open, eyes burning. Some nights I cried from exhaustion. Other nights I cried from pride. I'd land a new client and just sit there, staring at the confirmation email, whispering, I did this. No permission, no approval, no one laughing. Just me. Daniel struggled more than I expected. Mutual friends stopped inviting him places. Some quietly reached out to me, apologizing for things they'd laughed at before. I didn't realize, one said, the way he talked about you. Neither had I, not fully. Until I was free enough to hear it clearly. At one custody exchange, Daniel snapped when Ethan forgot his jacket. You're teaching him to be careless, he muttered at me. I didn't react. I knelt, zipped Ethan's hoodie, kissed his forehead. Daniel scoffed, still playing the saint, I see. I looked up at him. No, I said calmly. I'm just done playing your villain. He opened his mouth, closed it. Said nothing. That silence felt better than any argument we'd ever had. The real turning point came 6 months later. I ran into Daniel at the grocery store. No lawyers, no schedules, no buffer. Just us. He looked thinner. Less polished, his suit replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt. He stared at me for a moment before speaking. You look different, he said. I am, I replied. He nodded slowly, eyes drifting to my cart. Fresh vegetables, kid snacks, a small plant. You always hated plants, he said. I smiled. Turns out I just hated being told they were my responsibility. That almost made him laugh. Almost. Instead, he sighed, I didn't think you'd actually pull it off. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just disbelief. I leaned in slightly, lowered my voice. You never thought I was capable, I said. That's why you lost. His jaw tightened. I didn't lose, he said quickly. I still have my career. I nodded, and I still have myself. I walked away before he could respond. That night, I wrote in my journal again. But this time, I wasn't recording wounds. I was recording wins. First solo vacation booked. First emergency, handled without panic. First time Ethan said, Mom, you're really strong. I stared at that line for a long time. A year later, Daniel tried to renegotiate support. He claimed financial hardship, burnout, stress. The judge reviewed the records, denied the request. As we exited the courtroom, Daniel shook his head. This system's broken, he muttered. I didn't answer. Because for the first time in my life, the system had seen me. People sometimes ask if I hate him. I don't. Hate would mean he still holds space in my heart. What I feel is distance. Clean, intentional, final. He taught me something without meaning to. That security without respect is just another cage. That love that laughs at you is not love at all. And that being underestimated can be a weapon if you survive long enough to use it. Last week, I stood in front of a mirror before a client meeting. I adjusted my blazer, took a deep breath. For a moment, I heard his voice in my head. You'd be nothing without me. I smiled at my reflection. Then I closed the door behind me and went to work. Sometimes closure isn't an apology. It's outgrowing the person who never thought you would. The strange part was how normal life became. Not instantly, not magically, but slowly, like a scar fatting until you forget it's there, until something brushes against it and reminds you. Ethan grew. I grew with him. Mornings became routine instead of rushed. Breakfasts weren't eaten under Daniel's rules or timelines. If we were late once in a while, the world didn't end. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. That alone felt like freedom. About 2 years after the divorce, I got an email from Daniel. No subject line. Just one sentence. Daniel, I didn't realize how much you did until you weren't there. I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A dozen responses ran through my head. Sharp ones, bitter ones, carefully worded speeches I'd rehearsed in the shower years ago. I deleted them all. I closed my laptop. Some realizations come too late to deserve a reply. Ethan asked about it that night, while we were building a Lego tower on the living room floor. "Why don't you and Dad live together anymore?" he asked casually, snapping a piece into place. I swallowed. "Because sometimes adults forget how to be kind to each other," I said carefully. He nodded like that made sense. Kids always know more than we think. "Are you happy now?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "I really am." He smiled and went back to his tower. That was enough. I started speaking up more, at work, in meetings, in life. I stopped softening my words to make others comfortable, stopped apologizing for taking up space. When clients pushed boundaries, I pushed back. When someone interrupted me, I finished my sentence anyway. Each time felt like reclaiming something Daniel had slowly taken without me noticing. One evening, after Ethan was asleep, I opened an old box in the closet. Wedding photos, cards, the dress. I'd avoided it for years. I spread everything out on the bed and sat there quietly. I didn't feel anger. I felt compassion for the woman I used to be. She thought love meant shrinking. She thought gratitude meant silence. She thought survival meant obedience. She was wrong, but she was doing her best with what she knew. I folded the dress neatly and donated it the next day. Letting go doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like making space. I ran into Daniel one last time at a school event. He stood on the opposite side of the gym, clapping as Ethan's class finished a performance. When he noticed me, he hesitated, then walked over. "Hey," he said. "Hey." We stood there awkwardly, two people who once shared everything now sharing nothing but a child and a past. "You look good," he said. "So do you," I replied, because kindness costs nothing now. He nodded, hesitated, then said, "I used to think being needed made me powerful." I raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. "I didn't realize it just made me lonely," he added. There it was. Not an apology, but awareness. "I hope you're doing okay," I said honestly. He looked surprised, then relieved. "Yeah," he said, "I think I am." We walked back to our separate sides of the gym. No bitterness. No triumph. Just acceptance. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sky darken. I thought about the woman who stood in this same house years ago, being told she was nothing. I wished I could reach back in time and whisper to her, "You're going to scare him one day, not because you're loud, but because you'll leave and still stand tall." People love stories about revenge. They want explosions, humiliation, final words that cut like knives. But my revenge was quieter. I lived. I healed. I built a life so full that his voice didn't echo in it anymore. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Anyone who has to convince you that you're nothing is terrified of what you'd become if you believed otherwise. And the moment you stop believing them, that's the moment they lose everything. The last time I thought about Daniel like that, really thought about him, was on an ordinary Tuesday. No anniversaries, no court dates, no emotional triggers. Just a quiet moment that surprised me. I was standing in line at a coffee shop, half asleep, scrolling through my phone, when the barista asked for my name. I opened my mouth, and for a split second, my mind went blank. Not because I didn't know it, but because, for years, my identity had been tied to someone else. Someone's wife, someone's dependent, someone's shadow. Then I said my name, clearly, confidently. And it felt complete. Ethan is older now, taller, wiser in ways that still catch me off guard. One night, while doing homework at the kitchen table, he looked up at me and said, "Mom, you know you can do anything, right?" I laughed softly. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged. "You always figure things out." I turned away before he could see my eyes fill. Because that was everything. Daniel faded into the background of my life, exactly where he belonged. We co-parent well, cordial, polite, boundaries respected. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the man he used to be, the charm, the confidence, but it no longer pulls at me. It no longer defines me. And that's the part he never anticipated. I've been asked if I'd ever marry again. The truth is, I don't know. And for the first time, that uncertainty doesn't scare me. Because I know this now, love should expand you, not confine you. Support should feel like safety, not surveillance. And anyone who mistakes control for care doesn't deserve a front row seat to your life. There's a photo I keep on my phone. It's not dramatic. It's me, sitting on the floor of my living room, surrounded by half-assembled furniture, hair in a messy bun, smiling like I've just won something. Because I had. Not in court, but in myself. Sometimes, late at night, I replay that moment in the kitchen, the laugh, the words, the certainty in his voice. "You'd be nothing without me." I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude. Because that sentence woke me up. It pushed me toward a life I didn't know I was allowed to want. A life where I don't ask permission to exist. If you're reading this and you're still in that place, being minimized, measured, quietly erased, listen to me. Nothing grows in the dark of someone else's shadow. You don't need to prove your worth to the person benefiting from your silence. You need distance. You need courage. And you need time. I didn't win because the court ruled in my favor. I won because I stopped believing someone else got to decide my value. And once you understand that, no one can ever take it from you again. Sometimes closure isn't peace. It's power. And it's choosing yourself. Every single time. Yes. Years later, I found the box. It was buried in the back of the hall closet, behind winter coats and things we no longer used. A plain cardboard box, taped once, then forgotten. Inside were pieces of a life I barely recognized. Old bank statements with my name missing. Notes I'd written to myself reminding me to ask before spending money. A folded list titled things to do when Daniel isn't stressed. I sat on the floor and read it slowly. Don't bring up work. Keep Ethan quiet. Make dinner early. Don't ask questions. I closed my eyes. Not because it hurt, but because it finally didn't. That woman felt like someone I used to know. Someone who lived inside fear the way others live inside routine. Someone who confused peace with compliance. I didn't hate her. I thanked her. She kept me alive long enough to leave. Ethan found me there, cross-legged on the floor. "What's that?" he asked. "Old stuff," I said, "from before." He nodded. "You're different now." I smiled. "Different how?" He thought about it. "You're lighter." Children have a way of saying things adults dance around. I taped the box shut and carried it to the trash that night. Not everything deserves to be archived. On the anniversary of my divorce, one I no longer tracked but happened to notice, I did something small. I took myself out to dinner. Not a celebration, not a statement. Just a quiet table by the window, a glass of wine, and a book I'd been meaning to read. No one asked who I was waiting for. No one cared. And that felt like luxury. I sometimes wonder what Daniel tells people now. Maybe he says we grew apart. Maybe he says I changed. Maybe he still believes he was wronged. It doesn't matter. The truth no longer needs his agreement. The biggest shift didn't happen in court, or even after. It happened one ordinary afternoon, when a coworker tried to take credit for my work. Old me would have swallowed it. New me smiled and said, "Actually, that was mine." The room went quiet. Then someone nodded. "She's right." That was it. No drama, no fallout. Just recognition. I walked back to my desk with a strange ache in my chest. Grief for all the times I hadn't done that before. I don't tell my story often. Not because I'm ashamed, but because it's no longer the headline of my life. It's just a chapter, and not even the best one. If there's a lesson here, it isn't about marriage or money or courtrooms. It's about language. About what happens when someone tells you who you are often enough, and what happens when you stop listening. Words can cage you, but they can also free you. Especially the ones you finally say to yourself. I used to measure my worth by how needed I was. How useful, how agreeable, how quiet. Now I measure it by how honest I am with myself. By how often I choose courage over comfort. By how little I tolerate being diminished. He laughed and told me I'd be nothing without him. What he didn't understand was this. I was never nothing. I was just buried. And buried things, given time and pressure, become unbreakable. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's a life so full, the past can't find a place to sit. Yes. The thing about healing is that it sneaks up on you. One day you realize you can tell the story without your chest tightening, without pausing to breathe, without replaying his voice in your head, correcting yourself mid-sentence. You just tell it, like it happened to someone else. I started mentoring a younger woman at work not long after that. She reminded me of myself, eager, capable, constantly second-guessing her instincts, always asking, "Is it okay if I?" before making the smallest decisions. One afternoon, after a meeting where she'd been talked over repeatedly, she sighed and said, "I'm probably overreacting." I looked at her and said, gently but firmly, "You're not." Her eyes widened, like she'd never heard that before. I realized, then, how many of us are trained to doubt ourselves long before anyone ever openly belittles us. Control rarely starts loud. It starts polite. Ethan once asked me what love was supposed to feel like. We were driving, windows down, music low. I thought for a moment. "Like you don't have to disappear to keep it," I said. He nodded, satisfied. I hoped he'd remember that someday. Every now and then, I catch myself doing something Daniel used to criticize. Taking a break, spending money on something unnecessary, saying no without explaining why. Each time, there's a flicker of old fear. Then it passes. Because fear doesn't survive clarity. If I could go back to that night in the kitchen, the laugh, the sentence that split my life in two, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg him to see me. I'd just thank him. Because people who tell you you're nothing are unknowingly handing you a map. They're pointing directly at the place where your strength has been hidden. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about reclamation. About what happens when a woman stops negotiating her worth. About what grows when silence ends. So if you're standing where I once stood, feeling small, feeling dependent, feeling like your value is conditional, hear this clearly. You don't need to become louder to be powerful. You need to become truer. And once you do, the people who benefited from your doubt will call it betrayal. Let them. He laughed and said I'd be nothing without him. What he didn't understand is that I was never standing because of him. I was standing despite him. And the moment I realized that, everything changed. I don't think about revenge anymore. Not because I forgave him in some dramatic, spiritual way, but because I no longer need him to be the villain of my story for me to be the hero of my own. Life moved on. I moved forward. Ethan laughs louder now. Our home feels lighter. Decisions feel simpler when they're mine alone. I no longer measure my worth in sacrifice or silence. I measure it in peace. Sometimes, When the house is quiet and the world slows down, I think about that sentence again. You'd be nothing without me. And I smile. Because he was right about one thing. I became something without him. Something stronger. Something freer. Something he could never control. I didn't lose a husband that day. I found myself. Sometimes closure isn't forgiveness. It's living so fully that the past finally lets go.